On a full moon night Vincent hears the sound of a baby crying outside his property. When he arrives at the door with his axe he deduces that someone is trying to rob his house and he shouts that he is a hunter. Therefore the thief in question chose the wrong house to rob. I check the surroundings of the house home. He realizes that all his traps have been deactivated with a streak, so the hunter believes that the invader is not an ordinary person, but he goes for it anyway. But when he arrives at the place where he heard the sounds, he finds no one, so the hunter attributes this to the fact that he discovered that he couldn't have children. After all, these hallucinations started right after he received this news, but then he actually finds the baby on the floor. Vincent's wife goes to see what happened and he explains that that is the baby of them, and from that moment magic began to exist, and when the baby gestured for the first time with his hands, rain began to fall, causing the land around the village to feel the splendor of the water, and as a way of demonstrating happiness for the incident villagers began to sing joyful chants throughout the village, and in addition this new creature defended the village from all threats using only its mysterious power. Although it provided great help to the village, it continued studying to contribute even more to the well-being among the villagers. In this, people transformed the powers of this being into myths and called them wizards. And after that Vincent goes to his son who is telling this story, and Chiron asks his father how he can use magic. I hear that. Vincente laughs. After all, it's impossible to kill a bear with a shot of a magic arrow or even knock down a tree with a single blow from an axe. Meanwhile, two boys comment on Chiron and become curious about the book the boy was taking with him, but soon the comments get more acidic and one of the boys states that Chiron is adopted because he doesn't look anything like his father and his biological parents certainly abandoned him because he had some problem with that. Vincent gets angry, but Chiron continues focusing only on magic and stops. To cheer up his son a little he tells the boy that they will buy some fruit in the city as a way of rewarding the boy for helping him with his work. When he arrives in the city, believe me, Chiron is dazzled by the place, and Vincent asks the boy to stay his grandfather's store while he is shopping. And when he gets there the boy starts to help his grandfather with work, but it doesn't take long for him to get distracted talking about magic with his grandmother. Martin shows that he doesn't know what the boy is talking about and confuses magic with manga. Then Chiron corrects him and points to his magic book, so Martin understands what his grandson is saying, but he states that he doesn't have that much knowledge about magic and suggests that Chiron seeks to find out more about this subject in the bookstore next door. The boy goes to the place at the same time, leaving Martin behind with his book, and arriving at the library, the owner notices Chiron touching some expensive books and tells him to get away from that shelf because those books are not for common people. In the middle of this discussion, a nobleman goes to the store and asks the librarian to give him the books he had ordered to see where he will take all those books. Then he witnesses the noble sending the books away. Chiron notices that his father must have taken his book for free in that place. I remember his social class, and he wonders about the difference between he and a noble. Then he starts to get lost in his thoughts and ends up entering an area he shouldn't be in. The guard tells him to get out of there because from those gates is the noble's district, and when he sees the boy, another guard notices that he is a little suspicious and they confuse Chiron with the thieves' errand boy and decide to take him with them. But Chiron manages to get away quickly. As he passes by a specific place, he hears some people saying suspicious things and deduces that the place is in fact a magic school, in which case person tells everyone that they show magic if they get a question right. Then this person asks what is the essential primary talent for learning magic. In this everyone gives different answer but no certain question. Then the person reveals that the most important talent for learning magic is vision. In this, if the teacher gives an example of 1 + 1 which is equal to 2, however people didn't always know the answer to this simple question, but after a group of people tried hard to study a lot, they managed to prove that the sum of these two numbers generates the number 2. That said, the teacher explains that they can solve this basic math question without having to use complex proofs because as it is a rule that has existed for a long time they take it as absolute truth, and as magic also has some already pre-established rules they must use their vision to understand it better. And when explaining all this, the man behind this class discovers Chiron's presence and asks him to give his opinion on what he just heard. In this, Chiron wonders what to do, but in the end he chooses to climb the wall and participate in the class because he felt that if he missed this opportunity he might never get it again. Just like I noticed the boy's clothes, the students notice that he is a commoner and they complain to the director saying that he shouldn't be there with the nobles, but the director goes against the students' opinion and asks Chiron to join them in this. The boy says he wants to see magic in person. After all, he has only seen it in books until then, and here see this. Nobles claim that a commoner would never be able to read a book about magic, and Chiron just keeps asking to see some magic in front of him even if it is something simple. So Miri says that she will show them wind magic, and if I do that they all fly away. And right away of the landing Chiron is scared of the fall, but the director saves him before he actually falls and asks what they thought of this little demonstration of magic. In this, Chiron is amazed to have his first contact with magic and asks more about it than the students around them. They frown at the boy because they think his attitude is a bit respectful towards the director, but Miri decides to respond to the boy, explaining that magic is a means that goes far beyond beyond common sense because it is in fact a mental action that explores the truths of a specific phenomenon. That said, the director feels that the boy is not understanding anything. But Chiron compliments Miri's statements and explains that the fact that this phenomenon is unusual makes it an absolute truth. I hear this. The director asks if he read this sentence ready in one of his books, but Chiron explains that only common things are in the books. After all, the ideas of many great geniuses were criticized and treated as unconventional. But in the end these same ideas were recognized as a new common sense, and for Chiron he believes that the truth is hidden in what people consider in common. That said, the boy asks the director how he can learn magic. Then Miri notices that the boy is very smart, and to exemplify his explanation he asks Shua to enter the spiritual zone, and after the girl does this Miri hides 6 coins in his hand and asks her the exact number of coins he has. Shua gives the correct answer, so the director explains that when a magician concentrates he becomes sensitive enough to have exact knowledge of everything around him and beyond. Furthermore, Miri informs that mages are able to accurately tell the exact quantity of leaves in a distant tree, but to achieve this the magician must reach an extremely sensitive mental state, also known as the spiritual zone. In order to achieve this, the magician becomes capable of controlling all the phenomena around him, and the director states that anyone is capable of reaching this state. Therefore, he suggests that Chiron tries to practice in a quiet place until he blacks out, because upon reaching this level, a new world will open to him. But Chiron states that if he is unable to feel, he will not be able to erase himself, so Miri invites the boy to practice right there, because if he is not able to enter the spiritual zone he will not be able to learn magic in. Anyway, with that said, Chiron begins to focus on feeling his body in a less physical and more sensitive way, so the director asks the boy what he felt exactly, and Chiron states that he was able to hear all the sounds. But the students invalidate this report of the boy and claim that he would be able to hear dreams from this distance normally, and tells the director he deduces that the boy does not have access to the spiritual zone as expected, but he gently touches the boy's head and says that he will be able to hear even more sounds in the future if he continues practicing. That said, he ends the special class right there and goes back to school with his students, and on the way he regrets Chiron, because if the boy were a noble and had received training since he was little he would certainly be in the same level of his students, and against Chiron he decides to jump back over the wall and states that the training given by his director was successful. After all, he managed to become one with everything around him, and Chiron states that he heard a very loud sound and he wonders if this is the spiritual zone and beyond. That the boy has the feeling that his body has been divided into different pieces and spread throughout the world. Chiron is left without reaction, and I start to shake with despair. The boy feels as if he could leave his body and become himself infinite. While running through the city he ends up bumping into a man, but he apologizes for the inconvenience, but the man is still irritated by Chiron's lack of clue. I grab him by the shirt. The guy says that when someone makes a mistake that person should reward harmed in some way, so Chiron apologizes again, but the man says that apologizing won't be enough. Then he asks the boy if he is part of the wolf gang that wants to kill him, and in the middle of this confusion a girl called him interrupts them and asks what's going on there. Then the guy explains that that boy was possibly trying to kill him, so he's just giving Chiron a punishment, and the boy in turn denies him and says he just ended up bumping into the guy. In one of the men get angry and attack Chiron, saying that he is lying. Then the man states that the boy will have to reward them by bringing his mother to them. I hear this. Chiron's eyes change completely, demonstrating that he was irritated by this last sentence from the guy. Then the man attacks him again, calling him arrogant, and when he notices them beating the boy very violently, Amy tells them to stop with the aggression and goes to the boy to see if he is okay with this. One of the men takes the body away, saying he didn't touch anyone finger on boy. Then Amy says they should stop mistreating the boy and leave now, but one of the men says he will beat the boy and sell him to a village in the south, and furthermore he states that they don't need to worry about the boy's disappearance because he is not from a noble family. And hearing this, Chiron begins to mentally cry out for his father and mother, and Amy explains to the men that if they want to sell the young man as a slave he must not have any imperfections, so she suggests that they carry out an investigation on Chiron to see if he is ready to be sold as a slave. And they hear this. The men order the boy to take off his clothes so they can begin the investigation, but I can tell that they got it completely wrong. After all, their real intention was just to check Chiron's face. That's a fly starts to approach the face of one of the men. Then Chiron feels the spiritual zone taking over the environment around him again, and in addition the boy remembers when the director had done the wind spell on the guy caught by the shirt again, threatening to hit the boy, but this time Chiron sends a gust of wind at the man and consequently his colleagues fly with him, and Chiron watches them in the air and is amazed at what he just did, and with the fall all the men end up deservedly breaking down and start asking for help with this. The man goes to him and starts asking him several questions related to what just happened. After all, the boy shouldn't be able to use magic without being a noble, and when he notices some people arriving she lets him place with impressive agility. Then Chiron decides to leave that tense environment as well because no one would want to listen to him after what he did, so he begins to realize that the world is an an ugly place, and upon arriving home Amy is outraged at having been defeated by a simple kid. And as for his father, he notices that his daughter came home earlier than usual and asks if she has been skipping school again, and her arrogant mother says that she has already learned everything she had to learn. Therefore, attending classes is no longer as useful or fun, and hearing this makes him cry, just laughs at the girl's arrogance and states that even though she is intelligent, she will end up getting the worst of it if she continues acting like this. Having said that, he realizes that his daughter didn't even try to change it, and that leaves him a little confused. So Amy talks about magic with her father, and he in turn doesn't understand her intention, and she asks her father to introduce her to someone who works at the Magic Academy so that she can get involved there. And after a while, what happened, Vincente returns to home looking for his son, but his wife informs him that the boy went to collect wood in a logging area, and upon hearing this he notices that it is snowing a lot, so his son shouldn't be out there. Vincent decides to go look for the boy on his own, and on the way he remembers when he took his son to the city for the first time, and on that specific occasion the boy had also disappeared. Although Vincent had suspected that something had happened to him, Chiron kept saying that he had just gotten lost. Meanwhile, the boy continues chopping wood. I remember that day when he managed to use wind magic. Chiron states that he has never been able to activate it again since that day. After all, he was only able to use it unconsciously, and although he does not know exactly how to use his magic, he continued to be able to enter the spiritual zone normally, and being in this state of mind, the boy can feel things around him with much more sensitivity, from touch to form and even the smell of things. He uses the spiritual zone to feel the tree in front of him more accurately, and when he notices an area shining in the wood, he aims the axe at that specific point and attacks it, and with this single attack he is able to knock down the tree in a single shot. In the meantime, Vincent remains watching his son from afar and is amazed to see the boy using the thunder move to knock down the tree more easily, and when Chiron he states that this is the first time he has managed to accomplish the task thunder blow as well as the magic he used that day. He understands that he needs to seek more knowledge, because only then will he be able to use techniques without depending only on luck. And after 3 years of that day, he continued training until he was able to land the blow of thunder whenever he wants. He notices that he has already been in the spiritual zone for 5 hours, so Chiron feels as if his body has become one with nature. Although he has already been in that state for 5 hours, he feels that this is still not enough to experience all the stimuli of nature, and Chiron remembers the conversation he had with the director of the Magic Academy, where he said that entering the spiritual zone is the same as entering a new world. I reflect on this description. Currently, Chiron states that it makes perfect sense, because the expression different world describes very well the feeling of being in the spiritual zone. And after that he decides to pick up his things and return home, and when he gets there he notices some white horses and a carriage at his door, and then Chiron deduces that they have a visitor, and upon entering the house his father tells him to greet the visitor, who in this case was the head butler of the house Ogent. In this the guy introduces himself to the boy as Temur, and then explains that he was there precisely to see Chiron, and upon hearing this the boy remembers that the house is in the second class of nobles in the kingdom. Therefore, he finds it strange that they are looking for it, and Moran goes to him and asks if he already knows how to read, and Chiron explains that he has been reading since he was little. So the butler follows the confiscating, and Chiron asks what he is doing, and Temurin states that Chiron has a good reputation in addition to knowing how to read, even though he is the son of a simple woodcutter. That said, Moran calls the boy to work at the Ogent's house, and the work consists of removing the books from the large library in the house, and as there are thousands of these books to be collected, the butler states that the work will last an average of years, and although the collection will be done by other people, the division will still be done by the two of them. Upon hearing this he deduces these books they must have enough knowledge so that he can become a mage, but Arun explains that only the boy and his family know about this work, so if any of these books are leaked, Chiron and his family will have their lives taken. And hearing this, Chiron understands what, because his parents appear to be worried about something, and although Moran has been incisive in this rule, he makes it clear that the boy will receive a very good amount of money, as they must compensate for the fact that his life and that of his family are in danger. And in addition, Temurin guarantees that they will receive an amount of money that they would never get just by hunting. Vincent is offended and states that he didn't pay attention to Temurin just thinking about the money, because in addition he was also thinking about his son and giving him an opportunity to achieve his dreams. And hearing this, Temurin starts to look like the boy's father and states that Chiron doesn't have the slightest chance of having a successful career. Just the money otherwise would not let his son be used for this work, and Vincent states that he only assigned his son to this work because the butler had promised that Chiron could read the magic books, and Temurin confirms that he did in fact say that. However, even though the boy can read the books, he couldn't watch her all the time. So I remember the boy reading a book as a child after his mother taught him some words just on a whim, and after 6 years of age the boy started reading books and learn things on their own without Alina's help. They realized that the boy is very intelligent, so they both began to suspect that Chiron could be the son of a noble, and Vincent begins to blame himself. After all, if the boy had been raised by a family de nobles, he would have gone to school and would have had a much better future, but as soon as he thinks about it he comes to his senses and states that the boy is his son. Vincent explains that the son of a woodcutter needs to learn how to work in the mountains. Chiron followed this natural law. He was very scared. I remember when he saw Temurin for the first time, he decided to offer his son to help him with his work. After all, the boy has been reading since he was little and he could help Oran with his work. But when he returned to present, Vincent states that he regrets having begged Temurin to give his son this job. After all, things didn't turn out the way he imagined. Having said that, he tells the butler to leave his house. He immediately goes home in the morale that Big Daddy and notices the tempers heating up. Chiron Tom, with an attitude, decides to accept the nobleman's service, which Mura reaffirms what he said before and guarantees that the boy will be killed if any rumors about the work spread. But Chiron insists, after all, he would never let anything leak, and, furthermore, Chiron states that he will have no resentment towards Temurin if things go wrong. This Nobra informs that he will return to the place in a week, and until then the boy will have all the time in the world to think. However, Moran makes it clear that if the boy gets to enter the mansion he can only leaving there when the work is over is because the noble leaves the place. Vincent complains to his son asking him why he accepted that job, so he is willing to bear all the responsibility for Chiron to refuse this service. But the boy looks at him with a smile on my face and I thank him for giving him this gift. Vincent hugs his son and says that I will protect him at all costs. Then a week passes and, as agreed, Temurin returns home with a contract, and Chiron's entire family signs the document, and then the boy is taken to the mansion, and on the way he sees the image of his parents worried about him, so Chiron tries to reach them with his own hand but without success. But he goes back to telling himself that this work it is an excellent opportunity in his life. Even though he is surrounded by people of great power and influence, he wonders if he will really be able to survive these 2 years, and on the way the boy is informed that Ojan's house is located in the city of Cryas, in the kingdom of Tornia, and beyond that the noble explains that this family is made up of warriors, those responsible for creating official swords, and that their former leader was an official 3rd-class knight, while the current leader of the family is an official 4th-class knight called Bishop. And for to finish, the noble says that the Ojant family has control of all the city's forces. They pass through a famous attraction of the Ojant family, a place known as the Grand Corridor, and when they come across this, Chiron gets angry. And then the noble states that there are many things for him to put pressure on. They arrive at the office where Chiron Ira is staying and enter the place. Temurin asks the boy to continue following him as he will pass on the tasks he needs to do, and arriving at the new Chironi's room is amazed. After all, that place was the Great Ojant Library. Temurin informs him that those books will be taken from there to a new library, and the boy's task will simply be to organize the books, but for that he will receive a new list every week informing which books he should get. Furthermore, Fear states that he cannot leave the place after work and can also only enter the mansion with special permission, and after listening to all the rules Chiron insists on continuing that work, and the noble says that he will start work the next day, and already on the job Chiron notes that it makes sense that a person needs to take care of the organization. After all, the standard needs to be constant. He gives the example of a book called The History of the Swordsman and says that he could go to both the history category and the professional fencing category. That said, he also notices something else in his organization studies. In this case, Chiron notes that there is something that connects knowledge in a single line, and the name of that is history. After all, after learning history and using it to reinforce other areas, learning becomes much more effective, and among the 10,000 books Chironi notices that there are around 850 history books, so he decides to read them all during the 2 years they stayed in that mansion, and they heard a noise. He disguises it and explains that he needs to have official permission to be able to read the books, and Temurin notices the boy working after hours again, so he begins to distrust the boy and advises him not to ruin his privileged condition so soon. After all, the boy will need to take responsibility if he does something forbidden wrong. Then the noble stops in front of him, and Chiron soon deduces that the noble has discovered that he reads books, but instead Moreo tells him to be careful with his uniform. After all, both the leader of the family and the young masters frequent the library, and as family employee Ojant Chiron has the obligation not to embarrass. Furthermore, the noble tells the boy to fix his hair, so Chiron is more relieved to discover that the problems were just those, and at nightfall he goes back to the library to study and realizes what studying all the local history will not be so easy, but he remains firm and explains that in order to access the knowledge studied, we will need to understand each event clearly, and in the middle of his studies, he ends up sleeping on it. He was reading practical books. He decides not to do anything about it, and after 3 months Chiron gradually got used to the work, and one day he notices that a young master took a book and didn't return it. He states that there will be a problem if the book has assumed in this. Momo says that the young people were left to deliver the books on their own. However, he states that the nobles don't care at all if the books disappear or not. Relieved because that library certainly won't have any important books, but still the boy worries about his safety because commoners like him can be killed for very banal reasons, and besides, Chiron states that the servants themselves, they can become cold and heartless just to prevent the smallest of mistakes from occurring, and suddenly Lord bored Ryan Ojin's youngest son appears running into the library and complaining about not being able to rest. On this he starts being chased by a gentleman, so Ryan asks to Chiron doesn't say he's inside, and when the man finally appears in the library the boy asks who he is. He introduces himself as a fencing instructor and asks Chiron to tell him where Ryan is, unless he wants to get beaten up and to be threatened. Chiron gives Ryan's location at the same time, so the boy tries to talk to his master saying that it was all just a misunderstanding, but the master just pulls him by the leg and takes him back to training, and on the way Ryan promises revenge against Chiron because he reported it, and Chiron in turn believes that he did the right thing by reporting the truth. After all, the instructor has authority over the head of the family, so that was the only choice he had in this regard. Ryan is taken to the mountains where he spends a month and tells the Chiron it takes him 20 days to read the first book completely. However, after fully understanding the first book, he managed to read a total of 82 books in the brief period of 4 months. Of a book, the next books would mention the information he had already seen before, so Chiron deduces that after reading 200 books, the remaining 650 should be much easier. But during his studies, Chiron began to have some doubts and began to wonders about the real importance of studying history for now. But when studying the activities of past magicians he is sure that his decision was correct. He explains that if the scholar invents a theory it will need to be validated in reality by a magician, and although the magician and the scholar are equal, not all scholars are magicians. After all, they cannot enter the extremely sensitive state of mind also known as the spiritual zone, and Chiron notes that if he fortifies his knowledge he can even become a real wizard. And during his reflections he is interrupted by Ryan. The boy claims that he went through hell and it was all his fault. But upon seeing this, Chiron is just dismissive of the situation and asks him if he is really there because of what happened that day, and Ryan says yes and explains that he had to sacrifice a lot in his training because his master had him climb a mountain countless times during that time, and when he thought about giving up everything and falling to his death, Ryan remembered his revenge, and with that he took the strength to continue. And Chiron notices that the boy is much angrier than he imagined, reaching the point of losing control completely. Ryan remembers that he trusted Chiron to hide him, but instead he simply chickened out and handed him over to the master, and for Ryan this is an attitude that leaves him completely disgusted, and Chiron states that he didn't tell on anyone, he just told the truth. But Ryan said that the boy should have at least warned him that he wouldn't do that favor, so Chiron notes that he didn't can use logic against the noble and decides to just ask him what he wants done now. Ryan notices that even though that boy has recently started working for his family, he maintains a very calm attitude, so he deduces that the boy is just underestimating him. And to get this story out of the way, Ryan asks the boy to follow him. In this they arrive at the training field, and then Chiron he deduces that Ryan wants to hit him until he feels better about it. The boy decides to accept this aggression. After all, this is better than being killed, but instead Ryan hands him a wooden sword and challenges Chiron to a duel. Sword, and Chiron asks why Ryan thinks he is a coward, and the noble states that because Chiron is a servant of the Ojant house he must protect you, but instead the boy handed it over to his master for fear of being beaten. Saying this, Ryan tells the boy to go up and says he will leave Chiron the attack 3 times first. After all, the two have a huge difference in size, and Chiron notices that the boy's eyes are definitely those of an Ojant. Therefore, he begins to worry because if he breaks a bone, Chiron will need to return to his home. Grab your 3 chances, and when giving your second blow, Ryan notices that the boy had never held a sword before, and Chiron in turn decided to use the spiritual zone in his last attack, and when he hits Ryan's sword it breaks. And after making this, Chiron notes that his intuition was actually right because he used the first 2 blows just to study his enemy, and as for the third attack he used the thunder blow that he had already been studying for many years. Ryan is surprised by the boy's skill and asks where to attach the swordsmanship, so Chiron corrects him and says that that is actually a blow of thunder, and hearing that name Ryan remains confused, and Chiron explains that he went to the mountains with his father to chop wood and how his physique was not good enough to cut the trees. He needed to evolve this skill to compensate for his physical strength. Ryan is discredited because for him it doesn't make sense that the boy learned this technique just by cutting trees, and besides, Ryan has been training fencing for over 15 years, so he guarantees that Chiron he didn't develop this skill just by cutting wood. He remembers his brother Rai, and he remembers the day the boy had learned the Ojant's secret technique and how Rai's skills had already surpassed his brother's. Of the boys who no longer have anything left to teach him, that said, he decides to prepare a dinner to celebrate Rai's victory, and on the other side Ryan sees everything while he remains defeated on the ground, so he gets angry because he can never beat his independent brother how much he has. And returning to the present, Ryan remains irritated and states that he cannot accept this insult. Chiron tries to calm him down, but he tells him to shut up and gives him a real sword, so Ryan states that he will treat Chiron well if he proves it be able to learn the sword crushing technique. With that said, he explains that they will both fight on that battlefield in a month, but this time they will use real swords, and upon hearing this Chiron starts to worry. After all, he could end up being killed now, and so he asks Ryan reconsider his decision. After all, he has never taken fencing lessons before, so Ryan reminds him that he will have a month to learn the sword-crushing technique. And for Ryan, the boy has the potential to achieve this, so he tells him not to run away from this new responsibility, otherwise he will go after the boy wherever he is. The next day at work, where he laments and notes that he cannot trust people with black and blue hair much, and in the middle of his shift he remembers that the head of the family has 3 sons and a daughter, the eldest son being an official 6th grade swordsman with black hair, while his daughter also has blue hair. She demonstrated enormous talent in fencing, but she decided to follow her path as a pianist instead of being a swordsman. And as for the second son, Ryan Ogent, he is often called a genius by everyone around him and has black hair. And finally there is Ryan, the least talented son in the family, and even though he received the help of a dedicated teacher, he never evolved. And after remembering all this, Chiron notes that he was wrong in not letting Ryan win. After all, the boy has an extremely wounded ego. He could have lived his whole life being compared to his brother, so Chiron starts thinking about not dying, otherwise his parents also suffered the consequences of this. He decides to leave this matter alone and turns his attention to his studies as a magician. After all, if he manages to learn some defensive art, he would at least come out of the fencing fight alive. In the meantime, Ryan continues doing his daily runs, so the master notices that the boy, for some reason, ended up breaking his record, but the boy, in turn, from training, says that it's useless. But he gets angry with Ryan, and the boy claims that he's still standing after training, so he asks for the teacher give something more difficult. And when listening, the master is sure that something happened to Ryan for him to be so disciplined, but Ryan talks and says that everything is fine, but the master still doesn't believe the boy and fingers that Rai has learned something new. But when he thinks about it, he remembers that the boy has already awakened his Chima. Meanwhile, Chiron studies the concept of Zima, and it is explained that the Zima is a kind of imaginary body. In this case it would be something similar to the spiritual zone of magicians, but the Zima is intended for swordsmen. In this he explains that all humans have an image of their own body, but a Zima elevates this concept to the maximum level. After all, Zima masters have a complete understanding of their body, even controlling the movement of their cells. And, after reading the entire context behind this technique, Chiron notes that it is the complete opposite of the spiritual zone, but still yes, he decides to try to use it. In this he begins to focus all his attention on himself and soon manages to see the results of the first stage. After all, it is as if he were entering in the spiritual zone, and from that moment on he would only need to erase himself to reach the spiritual zone, but to reach the Zima he needs to go even deeper into his own existence. And in the middle of the process, Chiron notes that accessing the Zima will be inefficient. After all, the easiest way for him to focus his training on fencing using only the spiritual zone is that he begins his training. And against Ryan he continues training violently and questioning why he is not capable of using the Zima. And in this the master notices that the boy is already past the point of that day, and the boy orders him to stop training for now. Once that's done, the two sit down. Then the master asks if Ryan knows what his qualities are, and the boy says no, because he only knows his flaws. I can see that, but he says that this type of thinking distances you from being a genius, because real geniuses know their qualities and use them to their advantage to evolve. After all, geniuses never work on something they know won't evolve. And hearing this, Ryan says that he will continue following your motto of train until death, because that way he will get wherever he wants. In the meantime, Chiron continues studying fencing and states that in addition to it being used to kill his enemies, it is also used to work on the swordsman's psychology. After all, fencing teaches us that there are only 8 ways to attack the enemy, and furthermore Chiron is the firm who trained how to block attacks coming from the 8 directions. And during his training he notices that the world of swords is as dense as that of magic, and Chiron apologizes to his parents because he might not manages to return home, but he still claims that he won't regret his choices, because even if he dies, Chiron was able to see an incredible world. And tells Ryan he deduces that the boy could be as talented as his brother Rai, and if it's true he states that he will do everything to beat him. And if he goes after the boy, and Chiron in turn notices that Ryan is using incredible swordsmanship and totally different from his. However, he is able to feel the path of the sword, and that Ryan notices that the boy is not only dodging his attacks but also facing his sword, demonstrating that he has no fear at all. And Chiron states that he is not capable of ending his fear of death, but he understands that this fear is focused on the future, which in turn is just an illusion of something that doesn't yet exist. And taking this into consideration, Chiron explains that if people didn't think about the future consequences of their actions, anyone would be able to jump off a cliff. In that, Ryan notes that the boy apparently learned to delete all his emotions, but he claims who is also not at all afraid of dying. So the two return attacks, and Chiron manages to quickly block Ryan's attacks, but suddenly he starts to weigh his attacks, and Chiron notices that the speed of Ryan's attacks is exceeding the limit, that he is able to capture it with synesthesia. So Ryan prepares another of his attacks, and Chiron notices that PR is losing the fight, and seeing him in that state, Ryan notices the fear in the boy's eyes, so he starts to feel more powerful and says, "This is the much acclaimed swordplay of the Ogent family people, so it is impossible for Chiron to be able to withstand his attacks." After all, Ryan is using all his strength in each of them. That being said, he promises to crush crushed the boy once and for all, and in the middle of the duel Chironi notes something strange. After all, if Ryan had cut a little higher after attacking his abdomen, he would have been able to cut his side and that would have ended the fight immediately. But instead Ryan continues focusing his blows only on strong attacks and thinking a little more about this. He understands that Ryan actually has less knowledge of fencing than he imagined, and even though his skills are very good, Ryan won't be able to get anywhere with such a superficial understanding of fencing. And taking this into consideration, Chiron decides to use this flaw in Ryan's fight in his favor, and then he changes his plans to just be on defense. And instead Chiron decides to start attacking too. I notice this sudden change in the boy. Ryan is amazed because for him the boy, he should be very tired to the point of not even being able to react like that, and when he is attacked by basic blows Ryan reveals the fact that he is having difficulty blocking them. But when he remembers his brother's mocking smile he becomes angry and states that he will become the best swordsman in the world. That said, he attacks the boy again with his sword, and Chiron realizes that Ryan is only attacking him with brute force and cannot understand what he is doing. After all, he could use his swordsmanship to easily win in the moment, and seeing this thoughtless action Chiron says that he can't understand what he is doing, and observing the trajectory of the sword Chiron notices that he can't read it. After all, there are many variables, and so the boy attacks him, but he can observe something at the moment in which he advances, and after the clash the two swords one goes flying away. So Chiron still had his, and Ryan starts to mentally ask if this is really possible, because at the last moment Chiron changed his posture and he struck upwards, making his sword go flying. So he asks what the boy is in this. Chiron thinks he never imagined beating his opponent in any way, however he remains curious to know what will happen from now on. After all, even if that is a duel between the two, Ryan continues to be a noble, and as Chiron stepped on his pride once again, there is no telling what Ryan will be able to do to him. But instead of kicking him, he just accepts his defeat and says that Chiron can kill it if you want. After all, he was the winner of the duel, and the boy hears this and gets very angry and explains that if he kills Ryan he will certainly be killed right away. So Chiron says that this statement coming from him is a bit ridiculous and clueless, but Ryan explains that they were fighting with their lives at stake, and for being the loser he should be killed. But Chiron makes it clear that only Ryan was betting his life, because as for him the boy was only aiming for his survival. Therefore he states that this duel never made sense from the beginning. That being said, Chiron remembers that time when he handed Ryan over to his master and asks why the boy blamed him for simply saying where he was in this. Ryan states that he was just angry because Chiron was a very dishonorable guy. After all, he wanted that the boy had just helped him in that situation. And listen, Chiron gets angry and states that Ryan put him in a very uncomfortable situation where he wouldn't have known what to do, and furthermore Chiron states that this is an attitude that would make someone dishonorable. After all, if Ryan actually had honor he would have faced his master's training with his head held high. And after saying that, the boy simply comes to his senses and notices that he was about to die a few minutes ago. I'm going to come across the boy in this state. Ryan finds it strange. After all that bravery worthy of a cold-blooded warrior went away, giving rise to the apparently defenseless boy. And crying at that, Ryan notes that the boy is a genius, but unlike his brother Chiron doesn't mock him. He can win that. Instead of acting with disdain, the boy, he faced it with all his strength and with his head held high. Then he asked him the boy's name, and he introduced himself as Chiron Aryan. Ryan introduced himself by saying his full name, complete for anyone in this. Ryan reaches out to Chiron and asks the two to be friends from now on. So after a year of work Chiron receives praise for his performance, and out of the 850 history books he had to read there were only 200 more left for him. Finish all the books, and how Chiron is reading an average of 3 books a day. He feels that he is close to completing the nucleus of knowledge that he dreamed of so much. And in addition he also saw himself experimenting with swordsmanship, and during his training the boy gradually began understand the real essence behind fear, and with that he managed to increase the durability of his spiritual zone. And taking all this experience into account, Chiron feels that at some point he will reach his real objective, even though the beginning of this journey is very slow. And for him the best thing that happened to him on this journey was that Chiron found a friend, in this case Ryan, who in turn is surprised by how many books there are in that library. And Chiron explains that the patriarch, the second young master, usually go to the library always, so they should have as many books as possible. And C.S. Ryan becomes jealous of them and says that being smart must be very cool. And when Chiron he notices that by spending a little more time with Ryan, the young noble, he demonstrated that he is a very kind person and has good aspects about it. Chiron deduces that he is like this because he is the youngest son. After all, he has very reckless habits, such as throwing his books on the floor, so he asks Ryan not to do that anymore. His head will roll on the floor, but Ryan says that no one will do anything to Chironi. After all, a book is not more valuable than a life, and besides, Ryan guarantees that he will protect the boy even if he burns down the entire library, so there is nothing to worry about. But Chiron says it would be safer if Ryan didn't do these things. That said, he decides to change the subject and asks more about his training, and Ryan explains that he just did the basics and told his master that he would take advantage of the rest of of the time to study a little in the library. I would see Chiron that tells him to start his studies immediately. After all, he's more messing around than doing anything. So Ryan says that studying is very boring because it makes him bored, and Chiron reminds him that he's there precisely with the intention of studying. Therefore he must fulfill his objective, so Ryan asks if the boy really needs to read so many books to become a wizard, and Chiron says yes, and says that in fact he is very late. After all, he didn't have access to books before going to work for the family, the people, but now he has read more than 600 history books, and now Chiron already knows a lot of things. I remember the boy's discipline in his studies. Ryan is amazed at how quickly Chiron is able to read the books, and besides, Ryan note that even they being the same age, Chiron proves to be much more mature than him, and Chiron read a book where the author seeks to know who would emerge victorious in a conflict between a mage and a swordsman. While reading the book, Ryan interrupts him to complain about it, saying that he is very boring. I would see Chiron getting angry. After all, he was having a lot of fun with the book's narrative, and Ryan states that this book has nothing fun. After all, it doesn't show images, and it's not about fencing, but Chiron states that he needs to read the book before saying that it's boring. That said, he continues with the story. Then Rai goes to the two and says that in this dispute between the swordsman and the wizard, the swordsman would obviously win. In this, Ryan asks his brother how he is so sure about this answer, and as for Chiron, he worries about Rai because he has no way of knowing how much he was listening to their conversation, and because he was speaking so lightly with the young master, this could cause problems. And Ryan asks again how his brother has so sure of the victory of swordsman against the wizard, so he deduces that Rai is only exalting swordsman because he is also one. But Rai explains that to reach this conclusion easily, they just need to see the classifications of wizards and swordsmen on the continent, and Ryan states that their classification does not interfere during the fight. And upon hearing this, Rai decides to speak to Chiron, who in turn begins to become even more tense and uncomfortable to read, but he makes an effort and explains that if the wizard and swordsman are of the same level, the swordsman will have difficulty winning. Once the magician enters his spiritual zone, Rio corrects him and says that the magician will continue to lose. After all, there is an artifact called the Armor of the Five God set. This artifact is also known as anti-magic and has the power to interfere in the spiritual zone of mages. Then it is explained a little more about the spiritual zone, and it is said that fighting the mage inside it is like running away from sharks in the high seas. However, he says that it is possible to disturb the water of that ocean and take away the shark's senses, which in this case would be the wizard, and to do this it is necessary to use the anti-magic artifact, because if the magician's enemy is wearing this armor, the magician is unable to touch him even though his spiritual zone is activated. And I talk more about anti-magic. Raj explains that it is a precious ability created by mana flowing inside a dragon's heart, and thanks to that the price of this armor would certainly be gigantic. After all, each part of it costs equivalent to the annual budget of an entire kingdom. And hearing this, Ryan states that the wizard is still stronger than a swordsman because no one would have enough money to buy armor like this. Rai goes against his point by stating that the creators of anti-magic are the mages themselves. After all, there is a very large demand in this market, and it would certainly make them a lot of money. Having said that, Rai states that swordsmen are much stronger because wizards sell the weakness of their own species just for money. So Chiron claims that this is the true essence of a wizard. After all, they themselves created anti-magic to limit magical activities where magic is prohibited, and in addition, anti-magic is also used as a training aid in magic academies, and even this power can be used against mages. It is still valued as a fruit of the intelligence of the mages themselves. That said, Chiron states that it is not possible to define swordsmen as stronger just taking this factor into consideration. And hearing this, Ryan starts to laugh discreetly at his brother's face, and Rai explains that the reality and ideals of each species are different, and besides, for him, the wizard is still not capable of winning a fight against the swordsman. And after Rai leaves, Ryan gets excited and tells Chiron that he has never seen his brother with a face like that, and after 6 months of this incident, Chiron was ready to finish his I work for the Ogent family, and one of the employees comments to Tem Moran that Chiron is excellent at working in the library, so they should find a way to keep him working at the mansion for longer. When he hears this, Tem Mureo tells him to stop talking nonsense. And what about Zyron? He continues his work until Ryan comes to him and congratulates him for the boy having finished his work with the same mastery as always. So Chiron asks to visit his house before leaving, and Ryan gets emotional. After all, Shiro and Six hiding the relationship of friendship between the two for a long time, and when he realizes that he only sees himself in the library, Chiron is curious to know what the environment in which his friend lives is like. They arrive at Ryan's house. He tells the boy to stay calm because your family will only come back later. I get to Ryan's room. Chiron notices that the place is very small apart from the fact that it is at the end of the corridor, and it looks more like a simple training camp, and that they sit down to play cards, and when they lose consecutively, Ryan puts the blame on his defeats Chiron, saying that the boy is cheating with his spiritual zone, but Chironi assures him that he is not doing anything wrong, and in addition he describes some standard gestures that Ryan uses so it is easy to defeat him once he discovers how it works. Of their strategies, because when they predict the enemy's intentions they are able to make a more accurate move. Ryan focuses on analyzing the game as a whole. So Chiron reveals that using this technique he was able to access the spiritual zone much more easily, and during the conversation Ryan falls asleep and then Chiron hears the sound of a piano and then Chiron deduces that it is Reina Ogent. After all, he is the only one in the family capable of playing the piano, and when he goes to the girl to hear her play she asks what he thought of her sonata, and then he realizes that she has already identified him, and Chiron says that she plays it very well. Reed notes that it is the first time that the dose has come, so he informs that he was hired by the Ogent family to organize the library. Then she recognizes him as the boy from the rumors, and in the middle of the conversation she asks if he has played the piano before and he says no, and is afraid to continue a conversation with the girl because, according to Ryan's reports, the person with the worst personality in the mansion is the queen herself, and the girl is willing to teach the piano for him and asks the boy sits next to you, and then he gets very nervous. And then when calling him to come sitting next to her she says that he can go, after all no one will punish him since she allowed him, and Chiron thinks that she is being insistent and he is in no position to refuse, and besides he wonders when he will have another chance to sit in front of her a piano, and then she starts teaching them the musical notes and also the symbols in the games and asks him to play 3 notes at the same time, and that way he can make a sound, and he is amazed with the sound that is coming out, and she starts to encourage him to continue, so he tries to be a little greedy asking if he can try to play alone, and she ends up allowing him, but she wonders if he knows more chords than she taught him, and then Chiron starts, but everything is playing absolutely wrong, but he doesn't hesitate while he plays, and she wonders if she should stop him, but she thinks it's strange because he's doing it in the wrongest way possible, but everything still seems perfect because it seems like he is imitating the feeling of the performance he heard earlier, and with the boy's concentration he ends up entering the spiritual zone and starts to play better and better, and Reina starts to be amazed. After all, she can't call it a performance, but he has the essential knowledge of the chords. She wonders why this child is the butler, because in addition to being talented he is also beautiful, so he ends up being cornered for having let himself get carried away, but someone comes in shouting telling her to turn down the sound. Then the two of them, they get scared, and Ryan enters the room saying that if she is at home why does she need to be so noisy, and he is surprised to see Chiron there, so his sister asks if he already knows each other, and the boy starts to get scared because friendship between him and Ryan could be exposed, so Ryan simply says that he is his friend, and Chiron asks what he is saying, but Ryan tells him not to worry because this witch may have a horrible personality, but she doesn't care about these things, but in the Chironi head this doesn't make sense. He asks how she wouldn't care, and then Reina finds out his name and tells him not to worry because if Ryan says they are friends that's enough, and she says he might be a little pathetic but he takes responsibility for what he says, so she asks to him about what he was thinking while he was playing. After all, she was curious, and Ryan was surprised that it was Chiron who was playing because he had thought that his sister had gone crazy, and in Chiron's head 16 years of logic were falling apart. She may not care about a servant being friends with her brother, and so he asks Ryan why he lied. After all, his sister is a great person, but the boy says not to let him be fooled. After all, you never know when she will try to swallow you whole. So she apologizes to her brother for being kind of immature and says that she's happy that he got a friend, but Chiron says that he's actually the one who owes his brother, and the girl starts calling him cute, and Chiron says that if she thinks he's so cute why doesn't she keep him, and then suggests that they doze part of the family. So she asks if he's so close to Chiron that he wouldn't mind letting his older sister stay with him, but the boy asks what she's talking about. After all, she's not a big deal. But Chiron is before complete the sentence the sister is already on top of him asking if he thinks he can talk to her like that, and in Chiron's head he thinks that when he was trying to understand the nobles they get even more confused, so Ryan asks why she came to that house after all. She took a vacation not long ago, so she asks if he didn't know because Rai is going to take his certification test and she came to pick him up, and they left tomorrow, and his grandfather also came to see a friend and he will be back soon, so Ryan is surprised because the difference between him and his brother is huge, and it is said about the certification test. After all, the certification license is a license given to magicians and swordsmen who are recognized not only in the kingdom but throughout the continent, and thousands of people take the test every year, but less than 30 people get the certificate. And there is also the uncertified license, because if you graduate from a special institution approved by the kingdom like Alf's Magic Academy you can become a grade 10 uncertified magician, and when you get achievement point from associations or guilds you can increase your degree, but where there is money and honor people pile up, and even with uncertified licenses. There is a huge demand for the certification test, and this is an incredible test that Rai is doing. Being only 18 years old, and Ryan says that geniuses are really different because he has all the support of his family, and Rain then consoles him saying that everything is fine and that she will prepare dinner. After all, they are crustaceans from the royal palace, so she needs to prepare them herself, and she tells Chiron that it was a pleasure to meet him and says that they will meet again, and he says goodbye to her a little anxiously and starts to ask if he will really be able to see her again because he is leaving tomorrow. So Chiron asks Ryan is his sister has a boyfriend, and the boy gives a completely evil smile, but Chiron says he was just curious and asks him to forget about it, but Ryan runs away screaming for his sister while Chiron asks him to stop and let it go, and he thinks he let it slip just because he was sad. Then Ryan starts shouting that Chiron asked her if she has a boyfriend, but the boy manages to reach Ryan and covers his mouth, and all the maids are wondering, telling her what that was, but Reina tries to talk out of conversation, which is just child's play, and asks them not to care, so they go straight to the kitchen to continue making their dish. In the meantime, one of the butlers talks to Haynes asking if the young master had a guest. He says there was nothing on the schedule, so Chief Butler recognizes Chiron saying that he knew that name, so he says that he remembers it now and orders them to call Temurin to his office immediately. So already in the mountains, Ryan continues training, and his master thinks that he is excited again, and it's been a year since the last time, and that time his spirit ended very quickly, but he is sure that this will change when he goes to the royal palace. But the whole problem is the Zima, and while he is thinking, someone comes shouting the young master saying that the Miss Reina asked him to return to the mansion immediately, so he wonders what it is about, because if it is about his brother he is not interested, and tells him to tell her that, but the informant says that it is not that after all. She said that the temporary butler Chiron it ISIS in danger and he could dear. Then Ryan wonders why, because he thought the boy was going home today, and the informant says that the head butler Luis made the report to the head of the family. He doesn't know the details, but Reina said it was about his relationship with Chiron, then tells his master that he is going to see his father, so master asks what the problem is, and Ryan says that the butler called Chiron is his friend, and it seems that his father found out about this, and he says that he is sure that his father will forgive him if he says something, so he says that he will continue his training later, but his master says that he can't go, and the boy wonders, but his master remains motionless in his house, and meanwhile everyone in the residence is around Chiron, who is kneeling in front of them, and the family leader says that Chiron will be executed, so everyone starts whispering about the boy, because even though he is a commoner he should know that there are many things he shouldn't do. Meanwhile the atmosphere is terrible with the family leaders, so Reina asks her father to wait because she has something to tell him, so he asks what still needs to be said, because in this document made available by the chief butler are reports from several employees who express the bold way in which that boy treats Ryan, so he states that Chiron shouldn't have any complaints to make since he read the details of the contract. He asks if the boy has anything else to say, and Chiron asks him to ask a question, because if he is friends with his young master, what will happen to him? Then everyone is outraged because the boy seems to have no idea about things. After all, he should be begging for his life there, and the patriarch asks how he has the courage to ask that question and states that he is as foolish as a commoner should be, and he asks if the boy thinks that something will happen to Nobra for hanging out with someone like him, and Chiron laughs at the situation and says that it's true that he and Ryan are friends, and he says that they have been friends for a year and will be forever. Then the patriarch says it looks like he doesn't care much about the name Ogent, so he tells the head butler to finish with him quickly and not let the news about it spread, and they take the boy to take away, and Reina starts asking her father to wait and listen to him, but he says that the boy is already he confessed everything and he has already made his choice in the name of the head of the family. This is a decision he must make and he will not go back. And then one of the butlers asks if this is not an exaggeration, and one of them says that there is no reason for everyone to die by a single person, and he says that this house is their life, and to protect her they will have to get rid of all the conflicts that arise, even the smallest of them, and he says that they may be thinking that this is wrong, but they will be grateful for this choice in the future. But Ryan comes screaming saying that he will not allow it for this to happen, and he asks who dares to kill one of his friends without his permission, and his father says that he was the one who allowed it, so the boy asks why, because he didn't commit any deadly crime, he just became his friend, so his father says it's not I need to commit one deadly crime to deserve death. The circumstances of the nobility are so complicated that he can't even imagine. He says that as his family is dealing with a very complex situation, he is also enjoying the special privileges of being the son of a noble, so Ryan says that this privilege is of no use if he has to get rid of one of his friends, so his father says that this is immaturity on his part and asks if he wants to know why he has to die, so the patriarch says that being friends with a noble, it's the same as having a relationship of equality, and he asks if he really thinks that a commoner sees Ryan as a friend, and he asks on what basis. He says that because in this world there are many people who try to lean on nobles, so Ryan says that Chiron would never do that, and his father asks how he should trust him by telling him to prove that they are really Chiron's friends, and the boy is incredulous at his father's request. request, thinking that they are screwed because if he says he can't prove it, it's over, so he wonders what it's like. It's possible to prove a person's feelings, but he feels like he can't say what he wants without thinking. He thinks that if it was Chiron he could have beaten his father easily, so he pays attention to the sentence that he assumed he was Chiron, and then he notices that look that is taking in everything, the same look he had while dueling him, and then he remembers Chiron's words where he said that sometimes not focusing on the small things brings the best results, and the boy says not for him. Focus on the enemy's peculiarities but see him as a whole, because only then will he be able to see his true intentions. So he starts to mentalize as a whole, and he tries to see the person in front of him who is his father as a whole, remembering that he is the second-class noble head of the Ogent family, has a full pedigree, and is the certified officer of rank for a knight. And then he remembers that this is not a fight between father and son but a sword fight, and Ryan remember 30 minutes earlier when he was arguing with his teacher after all his friend could die and the teacher was blocking him, and the master remembers that that is the boy from the library, but that boy is a commoner. So Ryan is disappointed in his master because he didn't know he was like that. After all, he even tells him that if he could have a conversation while crossing swords with someone, that person could be his friend. But the master asks if he knows what the most important thing is for a noble, and he asks if nobles shouldn't get rid of things that threaten his family's position. He tells the boy if he has ever thought about what his friend feels being someone who is no more important than a fly, because after becoming his friend he shouldn't even think about solving this problem on the basis of the discussion. And the boy asks how he can do nothing, after all he was the one who asked Chiron to be his friend, so he says he doesn't want to be a coward. And his master notes that the boy is very determined, honest, innocent and passionate, but it's not possible become a great swordsman. With that alone he says that he has great hopes for him and will be rooting for his future, so he tells the boy to take the sword that was in his hand, saying that he will let the boy take this sword home with him, but if he is not prepared for that he tells the boy not to take a single step from there. Then Ryan looks firmly at him, saying that he will never forget this favor, and the master asks him to remember. After all, abandoning a friend is the same as abandoning a part of yourself, and Ryan starts to think that this is a fight of swords with his life at stake, and soon starts to joke, saying that how can he expect from his father, he almost fell for it, and he says that he doesn't need to prove that they are friends because he believes in it, and it's because he believes that he is friends with Chiron, who her existence, that she is friends with Chiron, is proof of her friendship. But her father starts to bite him, saying that this doesn't make sense and it's not that simple. He tells of a fight between father and son. He says that even now the prestige of countless nobles is being dragged on the ground, and if the fall of the house can be avoided he will even execute his own daughter. So Ryan says that if that's what it takes to protect his friend then he will leave the house happily. Then his father tells him to raise his sword. If he thinks that boy is his friend he must risk his life there, and Ryan actually draws his sword. So Patriarcha asks if he is really going to point his sword at his father, but he says the sword is not pointed at him, he is just showing his faith. But the patriarch asks how can he having friends, after all he could, and they don't even get along with other nobles, and says that maybe it's because he can't reach the same level as them, and for now he's just keeping someone worse than him around to feel better. But Ryan says he's wrong this time, after all Chiron is better than him, and he says that he wants to help him so that he can reach even greater positions. So the patriarch asks if he was the one who put these ideas in his son's head, telling him that a commoner and a noble could be friends, but he, it says, who didn't do it. While the boy speaks, Ryan asks him to stay quiet because he will protect him, but Chiron speaks his name, saying that he is not responsible for everything and he will take responsibility for the things he needs, because he had a feeling since wanted to become friends with Ryan because he would end up at a crossroads where he would have to choose between his life or his best friend. He says that even if it means he is going to die there, he doesn't regret being friends with Ryan. So the boy says that that's exactly what he is saying, because even though he is criticized they still remain friends, and he starts to think that even though they are immature they are still human beings with emotions. And he talks about a true friend who doesn't turn his back on himself, and everyone has a friend like that or would like to have. Then the head butler starts to get irritated, and their grandfather appears from the top of the balcony smiling, saying that he didn't expect to see a show like this even though he's already so old. He says that being young is really a blessing, so hey soon think that now everything is fine with his grandfather there. And the patriarch is discouraged by his arrival, saying that Reina told him that it would take a few days, and the grandfather says that he came early because his friend ran away with a young maid. So Chiron recognizes that man as general becomes a swordsman of the third rank, Ryan's grandfather. Then he says that anyway this place is slow as always. He is introduced as the previous head of the Ogent family, so the patriarch says that in that case that's not exactly good because the image of his family has fallen to pieces. But Garp tells him not to rush because he has spent time watching the scenes from behind and it is clear that everyone there has a lot to say, so he suggests that everyone first listen to the opinion of one of the others before saying whether they lost reputation or not. Then the first victim, the older sister Rain, starts to speak, saying that despite having met Chiron for the first time yesterday she noticed that the boy is intelligent, talented, and furthermore Chiron completed all the contract requirements and was supposed to leave the house today, and given such circumstances it is quite difficult to say that Chiron approached Ryan with evil intentions, and as a result she does not believe that her actions have tarnished the family's reputation. So the grandfather says he understands she and passes it on to the second grandson, and Ray simply says that he doesn't like that child, and the patriarch immediately thinks that he could count on Ray. However, the boy says that this matter has nothing to do with him, so the patriarch asks what he wants. Say this because he says he doesn't like the boy, yet he says he doesn't care, but Ray says that's exactly what he doesn't like, that child, but who Ryan gets involved with to be friends with isn't his problem. He says he simply wants this issue be resolved to be able to go to the royal palace, and Raina is impressed with his attitude, and so the grandfather says that is why he says that there is no place like home. So he says that to conclude he will call the one who observed the most Xiron for the most time and call the deputy butler, and when Temirin sits down, the chief butler starts pointing at the leader of the family, and he thinks that that message means that he is sure he is smart, because they are not people who give opinions but rather people who fulfill the will of the head of the family. Then Temirin says that Chiron did the work he ordered and did it perfectly, and he says that the boy finished 6 months early by the way, and the butler chef is uncomfortable with his answer, so the grandfather asks if he knew they were friends, and Temirin says that he knew that often was together with the young master, but he didn't know that they were friends, and in his opinion he is not such a child after all. He wouldn't be able to organize those 10,000 books. If that was the case, then everyone notices that the atmosphere has completely changed, and the only one trying to punish Chironi, he's still your father, but your grandfather says he can't accept that, and everyone is surprised, but your grandfather says he understands that they consider each other friends. But that ends now, because if this relationship continues, rumors will spread, and this perhaps becomes a weak point for political opponents to steal and use it against them, and everyone in his family holds a prominent position in the kingdom. He says that Rai has his test certificate coming up. Besides, what can he do when there are so many families depending on him? He talks to Chiron that if he is a smart child he believes that he will understand, and after saying that he looks at Ryan's face, who is unhappy, and says that he can see a splendid energy in the boy, but as he doesn't can understand his words because he also knows the immense weight of countless lives at stake. So the grandfather asks him what he thinks and says that he would like to thank him for teaching his naive grandson true friendship, but he asks the boy if he can end her there, but the boy responds that he can't, and Ryan is surprised, and Chiron says that if he is an obstacle for Ryan he doesn't mind never seeing him again, but that doesn't mean he can think of him as anything other than from your friend, because they two are friends, and he says that if they take that into account he will follow any order they give him. So Ryan starts to shake, saying that he is embarrassed because he thought it would be a relief for Shireen not to die, and he says that honestly it's like a part of him felt, but Shireen already knew that abandoning a friend was equivalent to abandoning himself, but Ryan thinks he already knew, and that was never something to be negotiated anyway. So he raises the sword, saying that hereby he declares. So the sister, he realizes that he is about to say something absurd because she doesn't know what it is, but tells him not to do that, and so the boy sticks his sword in the ground and kneels down, saying that he, Ryan Orant, the third son of the Ogent family, will become the sword of Chiron from that moment on, and then his father starts to expel him, calling the boy an idiot. Then it is said that the origin of the knights goes back to the founding of the kingdom of Torneria, and in the era of chaos countries big and small alike were constantly fighting for territory, and Ataf first, which was the strongest of them all, achieved the official unification of the kingdom of Toria. However, the new official kingdom had to rise up against the powerful neighboring countries, so instead of being purged during the unification, the defeated kingdoms were allowed to govern with their own territories directly, and what was created in this process was the kingdom. In exchange for the promise of becoming the only sword to be wielded by their master, they received the status of a noble, and that in that place was the origin of the old kingdom, and the birthday of the nobility. Therefore going against the old kingdom would mean becoming less respectful than a rabid dog. So Ryan happily asks what they think. After all, now he can't go back, and everyone is open-mouthed at the boy's idiocy, including Chiron himself, and Ryan notes that this time it seems like he made a lot of noise. So Chiron asks what the fuck the boy is doing in this. His grandfather calls him and says that if he really sees him saying that he will become his sword, it means that the child is well qualified, and tells his grandson to answer. He questions Ryan if he is really overflowing with brilliance, or does he just shine in Ryan's eyes because he can't shine for himself, but the boy smiles and says that a sword doesn't judge, he simply protects. The grandpa starts laughing, saying that this immature brat really needs to do all this to reach the top, and says that he is good with his words, but with his failing swordsmanship he feels sorry for his friend for having a sword like that. So Garp says that everything was resolved, and even though he still isn't the best sword, he will never get behind his back. So he asks Chiron to take good care of his grandson, and the boy thanks him for his approval, and the grandfather says that since the two of them became sword friends he can't just send the boy away, and Vice Butler orders him to use the transport that Chiron would use to bring her parents, and everyone is left wondering if this is really serious, because they can never say what the nobles are thinking. And soon after that Ryan says he feels lighter, asking if he saw his family's faces, but Shironi says he didn't need to do all that, but the boy says he didn't do do that because he is his friend. He says he is different from his older brother, but Chiron has the power to attract people. He simply chose to bet his life on a single person, and Chiron asks why he is saying something like that again, because now he feels enormous pressure, and even tells the boy that if he wants to protect him he will have to work very hard. And Ryan feels like he was poked well where it hurts. Then Reina enters the room calling him, asking if it's true that he swore to the ODS Knights that he would become Chiron's sword. Then she notices her brother lying down and he tells her to leave, but Chiron asks what is he talking about. After all, your sister has helped a lot so far. She says that she has a lot of important information from the opposing faction, and he asks what your father and grandfather are doing. She says that they are absolutely thirsty for blood. After all, he pulled the letter of the Knights. By the way, they are planning the boy's new course of action, and she says that his father is planning to put him and Chiron in the Swordsman Kaizen Academy. Then she remembers that he said that the boy has an insane talent with the sword, so he gets curious about that, and she says that she told him about his talent to see if they would be willing to invest in the boy, and she says that they are probably planning for him to be successful, if only for Ryan's future. So the boy asks who is sending him to school without his consent, even more so when he can finally play with the Chiron as much as he wants. And bro, what a great interaction. I really like this manhwa. I wanted to bring it because I wanted to bring it here on this channel. I'm going to keep posting this one, and if you liked it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you can give that help here to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. No forget to sign up too. Let's go towards 50,000. I went